Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Quitcast. My name is Becca Syme, and I am the host around here. I am an author success coach, and I've coached more than 6,000 individual authors in my career. We specifically use the Clifton Strengths metric around here, which is a success architecture program. The goal of Clifton Strengths is to understand where you are wired the best and the strongest, and how to utilize those strengths more fully to get more of what you want out of life. And so it is no surprise that someone who is studying success sort of obsessively, especially in the author community, is thinking about sustainability. Mostly in the last 4 years, it's become a much bigger topic than ever before. And I have a series that I want to do on the Quitcast called The Four Pillars of Sustainability. We're going to do the first pillar today. I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the four pillars, and then we're going to talk specifically action points and what to do to maintain strength in this first pillar in this episode. And the core metaphor that we've been using to talk about sustainability around the Quitcast and around the Better Faster Academy, which is where we do the work for authors, is the house, right? So we talk a lot about build the house you want to live in. And a house has a foundation, and that foundation is solidified by the strength of whatever is at the bottom, right? Whatever's at the base. And so we're going to talk in these four pillars discussions about the four assets or the four pieces of your author business that I think are the most important for you to monitor and practice effective management in when it comes to the likelihood that your house is going to be able to sustain you throughout the longevity of your entire author career. And the four pillars, just the extremely brief introduction, because most of what I want to do today is talk about the first pillar in depth. But the four pillars, a brief introduction. So if you think about a house and how stable it is, there are a lot of parts in a house. There are a lot of rooms, a lot of walls, a lot of fixtures, a lot of appliances, etc. But the four core foundational aspects of what it takes to maintain sustainability over the course of your lifetime are managing your attention, managing your finances, managing your health, and managing your self-worth. So those are the four pillars. And I'm going to talk more in depth about the other three as we get farther down the line. Some of the things we naturally discuss in sustainability are going to fall into those four parts for sure, because the pillar itself is really just the kind of core principle that all these different pieces of alignment organize around. So the four kind of cores, we're going to have a lot of different action points. And my suggestion for you is going to be, as you listen to these, I want you to be taking note every time I say something you can try. I want you to be taking note of the things that are starting to hit you. And here's a really important piece of information for you about execution when it comes to the four pillars, the work of sustainability production in the long term. So sustainability is essentially the ability to do this business for a long, long, long time. And we have this saying around the BFA, which is author for life, right? It's right behind me. If you're watching the video, if you're not, it's author and the number four and life, right? Author for life. And my goal is to try to deconstruct some of these expectations and rules that we have instinctively gathered during the rise of indie publishing in the last 14 years, let's say, 50, maybe 15 years. But as the trajectory of the way that publishing has opened the doors, that the gatekeepers are no longer the gatekeepers. So the trajectory of that has created some unwritten rules. These are things that we do not necessarily intend to believe, but that we have assimilated by participating in this industry, and that belief that we have about the truth of that claim, whatever it is, and we'll talk more about the unwritten rules later. But that belief that we have is causing us to make decisions that are building houses that we cannot live in and should not try to live in. So when I'm talking about the execution of sustainability and how we take action towards execution, some of these things that I say, and this is the tip that I want to give you, some of these things I say are going to absolutely piss you off. You're going to think, I can't do that. Absolutely not, Becca. No, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, or that's not going to help anything, et cetera, et cetera. Because that initial defensiveness that you feel, that icky feeling that you feel when you get convicted about something, to use a religious word, but convicted is essentially just the production of guilt. And guilt is not a negative emotion. And I really wish that we would reframe how we think about guilt around here, because guilt is really productive and beneficial. When you feel bad about something and you've actually done something that you could change your behavior to produce a different result, you should feel guilt. You should feel responsible for the thing that you have done that was not beneficial, but not so you can feel bad. Because again, emotions are productive. The goal of feeling guilt about something is to change your behavior. It is not to feel bad. When all the guilt is doing is making you feel bad, that's a separate conversation. We're probably more in Brene Brown territory with like shame work and stuff like that, right? But the feeling of guilt, the emotion of guilt is beneficial. So when I say something like, well, I'll just give you a spoiler of what we're going to talk about first. Nope, you know what? I'm not going to do that. When I say something like the very first action point that I'm going to suggest, a lot of you are going to be like, nope, that's icky. That feels gross. I don't want to deal with that, etc. That feeling of guilt that it produces initially doesn't feel great. The point is that it shouldn't feel great. It should make us want to change something. And I say this because the way that we tend to respond to things, because we have such a focus on happiness being the end product of every single thing that we do. We're so hyper focused on happiness that we don't take into account the fact that we shouldn't feel happy sometimes. Sometimes the goal of a particular moment is to feel something besides happiness, because all of those other feelings are also productive. And by the way, we are feeling a ton of really, really crappy emotions when we're trying to hit happiness and are not hitting them. So we're feeling all of them anyway, trying to hit happiness. But if we would instead focus on the goal of trying to utilize whatever emotion we feel in the moment to produce some kind of behavior change, instead of letting that ickiness make us decide that, well, I'm just not, you're wrong, you're bad, you're saying things that are stupid, that's dumb, I'm never going to try that. It's like, no, just sit with the guilt for a second and let yourself feel that thing so that it will help you to produce some kind of shift or change in your behavior. So the tip that I have for how to execute on some of this is, please don't write anything off until you've let yourself sit with these suggestions for a while. Like when I'm going to give you these action points about how to create more positive and beneficial, more sustainable management around your attention. There's a reason why I'm doing all of this, and it is because these four pillars are foundational to you being able to live in the house that you're building as an author. And if you don't have effective management of your attention because of the world that we live in, and especially the immediacy and the digital world and the 24-hour news cycle, like the way that we have transitioned into feeling like we have to be aware of the news 24 hours a day just because it's available for us to be aware of, and it's creating emotions in us that are making us want to be aware all the time, instead of what I say consistently, like my catchphrase about this is, the news is meant to be checked and not watched. And I don't mean watched like physically watched on television, like watching a show. I mean, it's not meant to be paid attention to at all times. The news is meant to be checked, sort of like I want to be aware of what's happening, but I am not going to pay attention to it because I want to make sure that I get to steward my attention in the way that I choose. And what happens when we get caught up in other people's desires, right? Like the way other people want us to use our attention, is that we lose our sense of agency. And attention, in particular, in the digital age, the way that companies, the way that networks, the way that everyone who makes money off of our attention knows more about it than we do. And they are very good at understanding what draws our attention and what doesn't. And they are very good at stealing our attention from us. So I need us to be more conscious and hear me. I'm not saying we should bury our head in the sand. I'm not saying we shouldn't pay attention. I know some of us will feel like we need to do that, and we can talk about that. But I want us to think about, I want to pay some level of attention to something, right? But I want to keep the majority of my attention focused on my sustainability, my personal sustainability. Because if we're not at least a little bit conscious about how our attention is being maneuvered and monitored and stolen, then we're going to just lose it completely. And then we're going to look back on the time and wish that we had done it differently. And I can't tell you the number of people that I have coached in my lifetime who have said, I wish that I had spent my time differently, whether it's yesterday or last week or last month or whatever. But we just were not as conscious as we should be about the way that our attention is being monetized, and not just monetized by social media, but monetized by everyone else. Monetized by everyone else. So, the first pillar of attention, I want to make sure that I say, I do think we should still be paying attention. I think not paying attention at all in whatever way you feel you are capable of paying attention is not for us right now. Like we need to be at least conscious, especially because, again, the feelings that we feel, we need to take action on behalf of them. Part of the problem with the way that monetized attention gets utilized is the action point that they want is not for you to do anything. The action point that they want is more attention. And so I think that's the question I would always be asking about when you're consuming content from people, whether it's writing, industry, publishing, news, whether it's global, world, or local or national news, whether it's whatever it is. If the goal is just to keep you watching or to keep you paying attention, then that to me is not the appropriate goal. Like the goal of understanding what's going on in my local, regional, national, global, sort of sense is that I can be the correct kind of participant in whatever it is that needs to happen for the benefit of all of humanity, right? So like if I'm not being a good steward of my attention, then I'm just constantly consuming and never ever getting to pay attention to my own self and my own worth and my own etc. Like I'm not, that's the last, that gets the remainder because there's just so much capacity for us to spend our attention in other places. So I just want us to consider as we are thinking about how to manage and monitor sustainably our attention, especially again, this is not a short-term thing. So at sometimes we have to pay more attention and sometimes we have to pay less attention. So you are going to have to decide for yourself. I can't provide you guidance for that. I can tell you what I do, and I will when we get into some of the action points. And I can tell you what I coach people with sort of different personality types to do for sure. But I want us to have some kind of consciousness about how our attention is being utilized by other people. And yes, there's probably more attention paid to local, regional, national, global, if you live in the United States right now. And also, that's not the only thing I'm talking about, because this is not just a podcast for, February 2025. This is also a podcast for all of our future and all of our present and all of our past, which is to say, the principle remains, the pillar remains. How you manage your attention, how you manage your own energy is going to determine how sustainable the life that you're living is. So if I'm saying, okay, for this particular point in time, for the next week or the next 2 weeks, I need to pay more attention right now or the next month or whatever, then it's like, okay, then the amount of attention I'm paying is going to mean the attention to my stuff is going to go down, and I'm okay with that. That's all I want us to be thinking about, is just that principle of, am I monitoring my attention and am I spending it in a way that I'm happy with or in a way that I am feel secure about, right? So that's my sort of encouragement, to have some level of attention to the outside world, and also to have some level of boundary with that attention for sure. And I just want to say, the encouragement to steward our own attention for a certain percentage of people is not necessary, because there is a percentage of people who are already doing great at only paying attention to themselves. And in that case, I would say they're probably not watching this podcast, but or listening to this podcast. But then if you only ever pay attention to yourself, you need to start paying attention to the outside world right now. And if you're only paying attention to the outside world, you need to switch and pay some attention to yourself. So that kind of balance for me is really important, because usually with most of our personalities, we err more toward one than the other. So I just want us to be conscious of how we steward that resource, because attention is a resource. Your time and attention are resources. Okay, here are some action points for how to steward your attention, in particular as a writer. The first one is, do not reach for your phone first thing in the morning. Put your phone in the drawer, or put your phone in the other room. Get an alarm clock. Because I know some of you are going to argue with me, but I use my phone. No, get an alarm clock and put the phone in the other room, because, but I have to, is one of the lies that our brains tell us to try to keep us in the dopamine loops. And if you are saying, but I have to because you're on call or because you have a family member who's ill or something like that, then you get a pass. Like, this does not apply to you. But if you're saying, but I have to because it's what you've always done and you have a habit of doing it and your brain doesn't want you to not have that dopamine in the morning, then this is especially important for you to take this action point. Not reaching for the phone first thing in the morning does not mean that you will not be on it at all. It just means that you get to be the owner of your early time. And if you need to do something else with your time as you're waking up, get physical puzzle books, get a physical book, like a written book. Get a physical journal and write in the journal, get a physical planner, get a adult coloring book or a kid's coloring book or something like that. But don't use that "I need to wake up in the morning" as an excuse to really quick your way into just being on social media all day. Because this is what typically happens. And it's the reason that I am so adamant about people being judicious with their social media, is that once you open those loops, the goal of the loops is to close again. And I will say, because one of my, and actually we'll do this one now because these two are more related. One of my other action points is to do regular detoxes from whatever it is that's consuming you. If you are a news person who's constantly hooked into the news, do a detox from the news for a period of time. We're going to do a detox class coming up soon here on the Author for Life free course library about doing a social media detox. But you could do an email detox, you could do a news detox, you could do a family detox, you could do a friendship detox or relationship detox. I don't care what kind of detox you do, but I want you to consider doing regular detoxification to check and see if your life is better without it. Because this is my whole spiel about the reason that detoxes are important. It is not because there is a some kind of righteousness associated with willpower or with holding out against something. It is because what I assume is true is often based in my subconscious processes trying to tell me something so that I will listen to them. And what I assume is true is often not true. So I want you to prove to me that you don't need a social media detox or an email detox or a ads checking detox or a family member detox or a detox from a particular friendship or a detox from a particular platform, right? Like maybe not all social media, maybe just one or two or whatever. But I want you to consider the action point of detox regularly because I think that it's important to prove to yourself what your life would be like without it. Because some of us are so ingrained in those loops and we have such fear that is gripping our psyche at all times that we don't have the ability to actually see what life would be like without that thing. So I always want us to experiment with it and just see what happens. If you feel like now is not the time for a detox, totally fine. Do whatever feels the best for you. I want us to detox regularly because the more you disrupt the patterns, the more likely you are to have control. So here's a for instance. Many of you who've taken our Write Better Faster course in the past, which is sort of our systemic author alignment semi productivity class, but it's really about author life alignment. Several of you who have taken that, the thing you do after Write Better Faster, we ask you to commit to some kind of change at the end, right? The thing you do is to not reach for your phone first thing in the morning. And the number of people who were like, I can't do this. This is not possible for me, etc. And then come back at the 30-day mark, we do these follow-up calls after Write Better Faster, where we'll say like, what have you done? How have things been going, et cetera. And we get these reports when people are like, I finished a book for the first time. I, wrote 2,000 words a day. I've never done that before. I haven't been writing at all for 2 years. And now I am writing every day, right? Like that kind of thing, because they tried the detox just to see what would happen. Action point number 3, do not live your life with your inbox open. Do not have your mail client or your Outlook or whatever it is. Don't have Gmail constantly open where you're constantly getting notifications about emails. So many of us, if you haven't heard of the inbox zero concept, right? And I don't mean the inbox zero in terms of the goal of having zero in your inbox, but the idea that when you get to inbox zero, all you've really done is sent emails out to get more emails back. So it's not like when you get to inbox zero, you're going to stay there magically. What ends up happening is you get to inbox zero and then you get all of those emails back, and now you have to inbox zero again. So, my preference for us, first of all, do not have your email client open all the time. For sure, don't have it open when you're writing. Just don't intentionally distract yourself like that. Give yourself the option of having more control over your attention than whatever somebody else's decision is going to be about what you should be paying attention to. Action point 4, have all your notifications off. And I mean all of your notifications off, your notification sounds especially, and like visible vibrations especially. But I'm a fan of having all social media notifications off, having all messenger app notifications off, and just letting yourself have some kind of rhythm to the way that you check those things rather than just being at the beck and call all the time of everyone else's attention, because then you become the responsive person in that situation at all times. So the more responsive a personality you have, which is blue strengths, relationship building strengths, so the empathy, harmony, adaptability, positivity, connectedness, relator, things like that, right? Includer. When you have a more blue strength personality and you are more data responsive as a general rule, you are more likely to lose your attention because of other people's desires for your attention. And so anything you can do to just cut off the access to you is my goal. So stewarding your attention. Narrow down where you spend time and who you listen to. This is one of those We may have joined every group, we may have been everywhere, we may have followed every newsletter, we may, etc., be in every single place because we just keep adding and adding and adding and we never retract. And we're listening to every single person, we're never retracting. Like, it is so important as you think about sustainability to not carry forward this idea of listening to everyone and being everywhere. And this might mean the number of places you travel to attend things. This might mean the number of people you listen to. It might be the number of accounts you follow. It might be the number of newsletters you subscribe to, whatever it is. Narrow, narrow down. Find the people that are the most helpful for you and listen to those people and stop listening to everyone. Stop following everyone. Stop being present to everyone else's attention desires. It is so insidious, especially those of us who are higher in input or we're higher in learner. We might be high achievers, so we like a lot, right? Like we have a big plate. It's so insidious for us to just continue to add and add and add and add and never retract. And we need to narrow whenever possible. Okay, the next action point for me is what I call outposts, not presence. So if I'm constantly, and some of you know this loop, right? Like, you know, the check this, then check that, then check this, then check that. Like, we cycle between apps on the phone, or we cycle between links or tabs on our browser. And I want us to be a little more conscious about not being so present everywhere. So if I have the potential for having 8 social media apps, I want to have outposts on most of those apps, if not all of them. An outpost for me is, hey, I'm never here. I'm only on Threads. Please come and find me there. Or, hey, I'm the most active on my Instagram, or I'm the most active on TikTok. Please come and find me there if you want to interact with me, but I'm not present here. Here's a link to my newsletter. Like, I would literally put that either in a pin post at the top somewhere or in your bio or something. Please find me where I'm active. This is just an outpost. And I want us to be more conscious about outposts, not presence, unless you're paying somebody to do your social media for you. And then by all means, do whatever you want. Try everything if you want to. I still don't believe that there's evidence that a significant amount of time on social media actually yields to sales for the majority of people. I think it's a rare person that that happens for, but I'm not going to fight that battle today because there are other things that are more important. What I do want, though, is to say, for your longevity, you can't be everywhere. You need to be practicing outposts, not presence, whenever possible. And that leads us into the next action point, which is JOMO. I need more of us to embrace the idea that when I limit the things that get my attention, I actually help myself instead of being afraid of what it is that I'm missing out on. You are going to miss out on a lot of stuff. You are already missing out on a lot, even when you are quote unquote everywhere and quote unquote listening to everyone. You're still missing out on so much stuff that you quote unquote could be participating in or listening to or whatever, just because we already have a limited amount of time and attention that we can't be everywhere. It's not possible. So unless you're going to pay someone to be for you in all these different places, it's not possible to be everywhere. And we need to start embracing the fact that missing out on things does not mean anything. You can still have information that gets delivered to you later by a different source. You do not have to be the first person that knows about this. You do not have to be on the leading edge. And I say this to those of you who consume my content as much as anyone else's. If it is too much for you to manage listening to 15 other people plus me, and I'm the person you listen to the least, you need to unfollow me. You need to stop listening to me, because what I want for you is to strengthen this pillar of managing your attention. If that means we're too much, we're too overwhelming, then that means you need to go elsewhere. But my hope is that you would be able to make a decision that would embrace the idea of missing out. When we did the Author Business Phases Summit this year, I intentionally made there be a JOMO option, the joy of missing out, that was significantly less money than the full price. You weren't going to get all the information, but you don't need all the information. You only need the information that applies to you. I don't know how to say this any more clearly to people. We have this idea that there's some kind of magic piece of information sitting out there that's going to change everything. But when you think about the way that those things come across your desk, especially those of you who have had a piece of information that's changed your life in the past, that information is not limited. It will come around at you again. You will get another opportunity to hear it. You do not need to be everywhere and hear everything. And so many more of us need to practice self-regulation about our fear of missing out. And we need to practice. And again, like I talk enough about this. If you haven't yet done the fear work and addressed your core fear with doing some kind of Enneagram work, we suggest Claire Taylor a lot around here because I've found her to be so helpful. We've also been suggesting the Beatrice Chestnut. I'll just grab the book really quick because I've been working through it this morning. The Enneagram Guide to Waking Up is also excellent. If you are an author, I always suggest going to Claire's stuff first because I think she has the best Enneagram information out there, especially for writers. But the reason I bring up that is because that fear of missing out is related to a fear that is not unique to missing out. There's a reason why you're afraid of missing out on things, and understanding why you are afraid or what it is that you are afraid of is such a huge first step in understanding how to control it. So I need us to at least experiment with practicing JOMO. And here's an easy action point you can try without doing too much aggressiveness about it. Wait 48 hours before you say yes to something. So anytime someone asks you to do something, anytime you get an email in your inbox that says, please sign up for this right now, it's going to be amazing, limited time only, blah, 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 whatever it is that it says, just wait 48 hours, try sitting on it and letting it be there and see what happens. If you never get over that fear, if you never get past the hump of that fear, there's something else going on there. There's some other desire that is not being fulfilled for you, that you're really struggling with. And that is a red flag for me, because if you're still continuing to feel that level of activation about, I can't afford to miss out on this, there's something else going on that we need to address. And we're going to talk a little more in the other three pillars about reducing stakes in different ways, but in particular, this idea that if I don't know every single thing that's out there, if I don't consume every piece of information, I'm going to miss the magic bullet thing that is out there for me to see. And it's going to be the thing that changes everything. And I need us to talk back to that voice, because that voice, and you don't know why you feel that, you just know, but I just know that I feel this. That is a signal that there's some fear under there, and that we need to start proving that voice wrong. We need to start embracing missing out on things so that we can practice the resilience that happens when you miss out on something and you know it's still possible for you to find information in the future that you need. It's still possible for you to find life-changing advice or life-changing things. You do not have to do it at this exact minute. That's a fear thing. And I need us to be more vigilant about regulating our fear rather than letting it rule every decision that we make. And by that I mean fear, like guilt, is an emotion. There should be an action point associated with it. And if there isn't, then we are in fight or flight. And then we need to do everything we can to regulate so that we can get into our logic brain, so that we can become logical again and we can make a decision from a place of logic. I have this thing on my phone, and I talked about this a little on some social media platform, probably Threads, the other day, about how I have this pull cord for emergencies set of recordings on my phone, and they're called PCFE 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, 5, 6. I don't know how many I have at this point, but But I have this set of recordings on my phone where when I get into these situations where I'm so activated that there's no action point anymore, the action point is just end the relationship, stop this thing, leave this place, don't do this anymore. Like that immediacy feel, that terror is a signal for me that I need to do the pull cord for emergency. So I have these recordings that I listen to where I will say things to myself like, you know what's happening in this situation. Your body's trying to get you to exit this because of the fear that you have about this thing. We've worked through this in the past. You know, this is not real information. You know, this is just a biological impulse that thinks is trying to, it thinks is trying to help you, etc. So I go through all of that stuff in my PCFE recording and I talk to these are the things you know are true. This is how you feel about the situation. This is what you have decided. This is how these people feel or that person feels or whatever it is. This is what you know to be true. And I tell myself all of this information so that when I get into that dysregulated state, I can remind myself of those things. So some of you need a PCFE recording about missing out on things, then specifically about this point, the 48 hours point, which is I know in my logic brain when I am actually feeling logical about this, I know that there's nothing that I can't wait 48 hours on. Like, even if somebody says this is the only I need you to do this in the next 10 minutes or else, I'm like, okay, that feels icky to me. That or else feeling is really kind of a gross feeling. And I don't want to feel that way. So if that's the way that I'm going to feel about this particular thing, I need to ask if this particular thing is for me or not. Because the more fear I feel and the more I practice feeling fear and allowing it to take over me, the better I get at that, right? Like the better I get at the skill of listening to the fear. And as much as possible, I want to try to practice not listening to it and getting myself back into some kind of a regulated space so that I can do the action that I need to do in that moment. It really is that when I'm on the line emotionally, like being above the line is like, I'm okay up here. This is fine. Things can happen to me. I can hear things that are negative and I can accept them and I can do whatever action is necessary. The closer I get to that tipping point where I'm about to go down into a place where I can't control myself anymore because I'm now in full blown fear response, which again, fear doesn't look like cowering under the desk for all of us. Fear sometimes looks like taking really fast action, or it looks like shutting down my thinking processes, or it looks like thinking too much, or right, like everybody's fear response looks slightly different. It doesn't always look like, oh my gosh, I'm so afraid, I'm not sure what to do. Sometimes fear looks like withdrawing. Sometimes fear looks like pulling away from something or someone. Sometimes fear looks like hiding. Sometimes, and some of you feel super competent when you do these things. You're like, oh yeah, look at me. It doesn't bother me. I can pull all the way back from this. I'm unbothered by this. And I'm like, oh, but your body says the physical symptoms in your body say you're terrified. And this is the response that you're giving me. So instead, let's provide a place where we can soothe the fear so that I can stay in my above the line it's okay for me to feel whatever I need to feel, etc. And I can be myself and make my decisions and etc. Like it's okay for me to be in that space. I want to, as much as possible, allow myself to be in that above the line space whenever I can. But so many of us go so quickly into, no, I can't. I have to. That you don't understand. This is I have to, like that feeling, and we go below the line very quickly, and then we just give in to whatever the fear is because that feels like the only option in the moment, which is again why I believe that so many of our problems would be solved in terms of all four of these pillars. We would likely have a lot more sustainability if we could be more regulated and more emotionally and psychologically healthy. But anyway, I'm digressing. I keep promising that I'm not going to talk about these things, and then I'm like, but they're so important. So anyway, So practice the 48-hour thing from an action point perspective and see if that works. Embrace boredom is another action point. Many of us, when I talk about doing no phone in the morning, many of us are so terrified of the no phone in the morning because we are subconsciously very scared of being bored. And I want us to have at least some experiences throughout the day where we're letting ourselves have that boredom, especially if you have intellection anywhere in your top 10 strengths, because you need a little bit of boredom to let intellection do the work that it needs to do. And what I personally have started doing for myself, because I'm such a high intellection person, is I have started laying there, like just laying there and letting my brain think about whatever it is that it's going to think about. And if it gets derailed from something, I don't worry about it. I just let it go wherever it needs to go. And then I keep my eye on how my physical body feels. So if I start to get dysregulated, then I do the PCFE recordings, or I sing, or do deep breathing or something to try to get myself regulated again. But I need to let myself have at least a little bit of boredom, and then I need to practice the skill of embracing the boredom, or practice the skill of that re-regulating, or practice the skill of letting my brain think through things until it finds certainty. And not all of us are capable of doing this. And again, if you're not dominant in intellection, it might be less necessary for you to do this. There are other strengths that enjoy this kind of rumination as well. Some communication people who don't have an election really like this. So I think there must be some kind of processing happening with the communication strength that has nothing to do with an election. Context, strategic, analytical, learner, like there's several of the thinking strengths that have some level of this desire, but I want to see us have some kind of boredom at some point, like lay on the floor and stare at the ceiling and let your brain just go, or go for a drive, or do something that encourages your brain to not just be constantly locked in this dopamine loop. Anything that can give you the resilience against dopamine is, and again, dopamine's not a bad thing. It's just that the world we live in is basically a dopamine production overload factory. Increase peace is one of the big action points for me, where I want us to spend more time doing things that make our attention feel regulated. So, whether it's a person that you listen to, I've taken to doing a lot of watching movies that make me feel like this, or watching shows. Weirdly, I think I talked about this on the podcast a couple of years ago. I went through this phase where I didn't watch any movies ever, and all I watched was serial television, right? Serial storytelling. And I never watched movies. I mean, must have been years. And then all of a sudden, I don't know what happened. I haven't watched a TV show other than like I watched some Ted Lasso, and I watched some Buffy, like for the Quitcast, because I'm doing these character series things. And I watched some Star Trek as well for that episode. But other than that, I haven't watched television in forever, because all I've been doing is watching movies, and very specifically watching movies that produce a feeling of security in me. Like something is this nostalgia loop is always open, and I'm always trying to close this nostalgia loop. So I've been doing a ton of movie watching. But what's interesting is watching TV provides a little bit of disassociation for me. Watching movies, I'm more likely to pay attention to the storytelling. So if you're the opposite, then do the opposite, because unless paying attention to storytelling doesn't bring you peace, but it brings me peace. I really like that feeling. But the goal of this action point for attention is that when I feel more peaceful, when I feel more secure, when I feel more at home, I don't feel the need to be invested in the dopamine loop as much. Like when I talk to people who are really important to me, I have a couple of people that I try to Zoom with as often as I'm capable of Zooming with them, just because I love them. Like they're my favorite people in the world. And when I'm on the texting or Zoom or phone with them, I don't think about Facebook or Threads or TikTok or whatever, right? Because I'm so engaged in that process of being present with those people, and they matter so much to me. and their happiness and well-being matters so much to me that my attention gets more focused on them, and it allows me to disconnect from some of this dopamine cycle stuff. So that's what I mean when I say increasing peace. I mean finding places where you are actively generating security, peace, love, contentment, connection, whatever the value is that you want to get out of that moment that makes you feel secure, makes you feel peaceful. Because anything we can do to increase that helps us in the long run to be able to steward our attention better. The last action point, and this is maybe the most important for what I would say most of us who are probably listening to this episode, most of us who are data responsive for sure. But the the one action point I probably want all of us to do is to prioritize our own work. That means before I work on other people's stuff, before I give my attention to other people, I do something for myself. I read my writing from the last time I wrote. I go over my notes. I read an old book that I've written. I read some of my old newsletter content. I create content for myself. I still don't do social media. I still try to stay out of email. But for me, what this looks like is I try to work on my own fiction before I do anything for the BFA, before I do any writing, because I'm working on the next Quit book, before I do any Patreon content, before I do any email coaching replying, because we do these asynchronous coaching as part of our quarterly coaching program. Before I do anything, I try to do my own writing first, my own fiction writing first. And I have this, I think I've showed everybody this before. I took a little break when I went to Germany because I wasn't doing as much. Although I still, when I looked at it, I was like, I still got an awful lot of days, but there were just like 5 days maybe out of those that I wasn't. But I've been trying to just put stickers for the content that I'm working on. And specifically trying to get the content that are my fiction content on as many of the days in January as I can. And when I'm doing um, February, my goal is to have every day that I do one of those blue or red stars on my day because I want those to be my priority. Because in terms of stewarding my attention, if we assume that the goal for our entire life is for us to have a good life, right? It's for us to have safety and security and for us to have a beneficial life and to be, and I say as happy as possible because it's not possible for us to be happy all the time, nor should we be. If you're happy all the time, there's something wrong. Like that actually worries me a little bit if you're happy all the time, because you should be feeling a range of emotion, of human emotion. But for us to be overall happy, for us to be overall secure, for us to be overall safe, that's what I want. And so that means sometimes we have to pay more attention to some things than others because that's the phase of life that we're in. And sometimes we need to focus more on paying attention to our own work because we have been neglecting it. We've been neglecting ourselves. We are not creating a sustainable future for ourselves in our author career. That means we have to pay attention to our author career and specifically to the writing. So many of us are paying so much attention to marketing and information and strategies and tactics, and we are not paying enough attention to the writing. And I want to encourage you to do that. So my final action point encouragement of prioritize your own work. I want all of you, when you stop listening to this, and I'm going to end in just a second, I want all of you to open the manuscript when you stop listening to this. I'm going to pause for a second and let you consider opening the manuscript while I'm still have not finished, because I would rather see you make sure to open it. So I'm going to pause for just a second, open the manuscript, go right now. Some of you haven't opened the manuscript in weeks or days. Some of you have it open already. Some of you opened it a couple of hours ago, but I'm going to open my manuscript. Hang on. And there's the cursor. And if you can write the next sentence, Yeah, I think I can write the next sentence. Okay. If you can write the next sentence, then write the next sentence. And if you can't, then ask yourself, what do you not know yet that will help you be able to write the next sentence? So prioritize your own work becomes the main thrust of the attention pillar. Thank you so much for paying attention to this Quitcast episode. Hopefully, we've been good stewards of your attention today. I'm looking forward to the other three pillar episodes coming up. My guess is we're probably going to release them not on a week by week basis because I want to get these out more quickly. But we'll see what happens. It depends on how fast I can record them. So thank you so much for paying attention to me. Please go and open your manuscript and prioritize your own work right now. And if not, if you can't do it right immediately in this moment because you're in the car, do it when you get home or do it tomorrow morning, first thing. Even if you don't write, even if you are not capable of writing first thing in the morning, open your manuscript first in the morning and look at where the cursor is and just ask yourself if you can write the next sentence. And if the answer is no, then write later in the day. All right. Thanks, everyone. Happy writing. I hope you have a good week. I will see you soon. Bye, everybody.